Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I'm going to be talking about some must-own fantasy football running backs for the 2021 season, going in rounds 1 through 4 of our 12-team leagues this season. So essentially, RBs being drafted in the top 48 picks that I think are very, very good, and are too good, in fact, to be passed on for players at other positions based off of their relative draft prices right now here in about the middle of August. So these are guys you want to be targeting. You need these players on your teams, and they're going to become the cores of your rosters for this fantasy season. So before we get started, head down, drop this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Without further ado, let's not waste any time and hit the intro. Alrighty, here we go. Just a quick note before we get started. Bear with me, you guys. I'm a little bit sick right now. I'm a bit stuffed up and having a little bit of a head cold right now. So bear with me. I'm doing my best here, and we'll get through today's video. The first thing I want to talk about before I dive into some of the names in the first round who might seem a bit more obvious, and something I'm going to do for each round here today that I don't typically do, is I'm going to spend some time talking about the players who aren't on this list and why they don't make it as opposed to why they do. Because I think for rounds 1 through 4, especially the first couple rounds in particular, it might be fairly obvious why some of these players are must-own running backs because they're, like I said in the intro, too good to pass on for another position, but other players aren't. And so the first two major fantasy running backs that didn't make my must-owns list here for the first round are Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb. And the reasoning for that, they are great running backs, very good talents, and very valuable fantasy assets, is that I think you can have an argument to be made for drafting a Travis Kelce before them, maybe even drafting your top wide receiver off the board before them. Because for Nick Chubb, I think that his ceiling is somewhat capped. It's very good, and his floor is elite, but I think that at the end of the day, what it comes down to is the fact that he's missing a piece of that dynamic to make him a true must-own in that first round, as he's going as one of the later first-round picks in this category. For Jonathan Taylor, it's a little bit of the opposite. I would say his ceiling is great. We've seen what he can do, but the floor is a little bit risky, and I've seen some boom-bust tags slapped on him here throughout the offseason from other fantasy channels and whatnot, from other fantasy sources. And I think that while I'm not quite ready to give him that level of a boom-bust label, he still has risk. Marlon Mack coming back to the backfield, Carson Wentz's injury, what will that Colts offensive line look like without Quentin Nelson at the start of the season? There's just a bit more risk in play here, and I prefer his other running back counterparts in the first round here in comparison to him. So those are the two backs, namely, that will be absent from the start of today's list. But the first guy we've got up here is Christian McCaffrey of the Carolina Panthers. This one's straightforward. There's not really much explanation that needs to be made here. He's probably the most likely threat to go for 2,000 yards plus from scrimmage this season. His ability as a rusher and receiver, his capabilities in all phases of the game are fantastic. When he's healthy, when he's actually out there on the field producing, his numbers are off the charts. He is unquestionably the best lineup play each and every week when we have that health element and that health factor secured for us. So if you're drafting first overall, I think you got to go with Christian McCaffrey here. Earlier on in the offseason, I was a bit more skeptical, tossed an injury-prone tag on him. But when I reassessed the situation, took a step back and whatnot, I realized that it was more of a case that McCaffrey happened to get injured rather than the fact that he's actually an injury-prone player. There's a difference. That's something I had to figure out for myself. And so after coming to that realization, here we go. Dalvin Cook has taken a backseat to my running back 2 spot, but he is also still a must-own RB this season for nearly the same reasons. His ceiling is not quite as good as McCaffrey's because he's not as elite of a pass catcher, but in terms of his ability as a raw rusher, the talent, the potential, the opportunities in his offense, it's all there. You've got everything you're looking for, the volume on a per-game basis. Again, he can be used as a receiver. He's just not a threat, I would say, to go for 1 to 1,200 yards, for 1,000 to 1,200 yards, that being like a McCaffrey could be, because he's so dynamic in that phase of the game. Cook's going to give you more 23 to 25 touches on the ground. Maybe he'll sprinkle in 3 to 4 catches through the air and give you some usage in that sense of the things. But for the most part, this is a player we should not be considering any wide receiver over, even in the most extreme of PPR formats. The value is too good. The running back positional scarcity makes it too much of a weighted advantage here to not take him. So Dalvin Cook makes the list as well. Derrick Henry will start to pick up through things here as I've went a little bit more in depth than I expected to for those first 2 players. But Henry simply has an elite fantasy floor. He has the best pure rushing volume in fantasy floor of any player out there because of the raw touches he's getting on the ground. He's going to be the goal line back. He's the do-it-all player for this Titans offense with the exception of the receiving game. But I do like the fact and the added element that the Titans brought in Julio Jones this offseason, because defenses are now going to have to pick their poison. I think sometimes they're going to still stick with crowding the box and having lighter coverage, but it's going to go back and forth. You're going to see some games, A.J. Brown and Julio Jones are having field days over the top. In other games, they're going to get scared. Maybe even at halftime, they back off, and then Derrick Henry's just going to pound the ball down their throat. So there's still elite fantasy value to be had here. Derrick Henry is absolutely a player, even in PPR formats, that is a must-own back at the top of the draft board. And Alvin Kamara, even with his changing situation, the evolving situation with the Saints not having too much of a true passing game, he's still going to have to embrace a larger role and more volume for this team. They're going to rely on him more as a pure rusher, and we know his best value comes in the receiving game, but I still think he's a player that has elite upside despite the fact that his efficiency may drop this season. His touchdowns will probably regress, but I expect those touches to increase. And overall, he's going to be a really strong player this season. And again, we're not yet to the point on the draft board where I think it's logical for us to start considering the wide receiver or even tight end positions. Saquon Barkley's a player who I would have kept off this list 3 days ago, but following the news of Joe Judge saying that, well, obviously he's coming back to practice. He has had his first practice under his belt now. He's out there on the field for New York. But Joe Judge said, theoretically, Saquon Barkley could be playing in the preseason. This is something, again, where I think Saquon's getting a bit too much harsh treatment as an injury-prone player, as a guy who can't stay healthy, but it's more of a situation where he happened to get hurt. These freak accidents, these large long-term injuries, yes, they are significant. They are noteworthy. But that just because a player has one major time frame injury in their career doesn't mean that they are now an injury-prone player. I would say it's fair to say that about Saquon if he comes in this season, has hamstring issues, ankle injuries, and really struggles to rebound from the ACL. But until that happens, I think he still has the best upside, even more so than a Christian McCaffrey in fantasy football. Not as a complete dynamic player, but in the ability for him to be a one-touch scoring threat. You give Saquon the ball, you have a chance to score. This is the best offense that the New York Giants have had since he's been in town. As long as Danny Dimes doesn't derail things, as long as this offensive line is average or better, he's going to have a great season. He's going to have a bounce-back year, and he's going to put up the numbers that we've all been waiting for since they drafted him at number 2 overall. Zeke here, this is such a great value play. He's probably the best value running back in the first round right now. I think that for a player who has a complete skill set and an underrated one at that, we don't give Zeke the respect he deserves as a receiver. And the volume he sees in this Dallas offense, it's, again, too good to pass on here. The running backs you're getting in the second round have elite upside still, but they don't give us this elite fantasy floor that we see with Ezekiel Elliott when Dak Prescott is on the field. And obviously, he's had his struggles this offseason. He was recovering from a gruesome leg injury. Now he's got a little bit of an overcompensation issue going on with his shoulder. I think that what I've heard talked about and what I've heard other medical experts saying is that when you injure a lower body part and you're a quarterback, you're really throwing and getting the power out of your hips and your legs. And when that is injured, you're going to overcompensate and start to become an arm thrower. Yes, the arm is what facilitates the throw and the movement of actually releasing the football, but the power and the burst that you get on your ball is coming from your lower body. So the fact that he's probably using more elbow and shoulder now to throw the ball, I think is what ended up giving him this baseball-like injury that they're classifying it as. So long story short, if Dak is out there healthy on the field, Zeke is absolutely 100% a must-own running back and someone you should not be passing on if he's sitting on the board between picks 5 through 8, and it depends on what your exact running back rankings are. For me, Zeke's my RB6 right now, with Saquon moving back up into the fold of things, but nonetheless, a player you need on your rosters. And the last guy here, he's a bit of a fringe player. You could argue this one way or another for the first round, but I've got Aaron Jones up here for the simple fact that he's one of the most efficient backs in the league for fantasy purposes as both a rusher and receiver outside of Alvin Kamara. I'm not going to go as far to say he's mini Kamara, but he is kind of that next running back up who hasn't ever really seen elite volume totals in his career. He hasn't ever been a 20-plus touch per game back, not even in his 2019 season. He's just been uber efficient, had a high touchdown count that season, and was used in a very dynamic fashion. So there's a lot of things to like. The yardage could absolutely improve. Aaron Rodgers is back now. That means the box will be lighter. They're going to be a passing threat. And Aaron Jones is very good in that phase of the game as well, and had, I would say, an underproductive season in that category in 2020. So there's a lot of room for improvement here. His touchdown count was spliced in half from 2019 to 2020. Maybe we could see that number hover around the same category or trend upwards potentially if we get a nice boom year out of him. I think that, again, you can argue this one both ways, but I like to go Aaron Jones here. So heading into the second round of things here, Austin Ekeler is my first name up on the board. But once again, we're going to talk about the name that isn't here and won't be making an appearance on my must-own players list for round 2. That would be Joe Mixon, first and foremost. I think there's some risk here. We've seen him have, of the running backs being taken in this territory on draft boards this season, more RB30 or worst finishes than any other player on the board at this spot. Additionally, we haven't seen DeAndre Swift on this list, won't see DeAndre Swift on this list. He's kind of a fringe round 2, round 3 prospect, but he's still a player I think has some elite upside. He's very boom bust though. Right now he's got a groin issue. Injuries have plagued him, and I think that unlike a Saquon Barkley or a Christian McCaffrey, for how frequent we're seeing these nagging injuries pop up for Swift, I'm getting pretty close to slapping the injury-prone tag on him. Again, he's expected to miss 2 to 3 weeks now with that groin issue, so he'll probably be a toss-up game-time decision for week 1. If I'm a fantasy owner right now, if I haven't had my leagues draft yet, Jamal Williams might be one of the most valuable handcuff options this season because he might see the field a lot. And as a Packer fan, I know what he's been able to do watching him for all 4 years of his rookie contract. He's got a very complete skill set. He's not elite at any one thing or another, but he also doesn't have a hole in his game. So a little tidbit there, go check him out, go pick him up in those leagues, and if you can get a nice value draft pick off of him in the late rounds of your leagues, that's something to do. But Austin Ekeler here in the second round, this is more of a PPR play. I do call Ekeler mini McCaffrey. He averaged 6.5 targets per game last season in the 10 games he was healthy. Look, there's just not very many backs that see the elite receiving volume that he does, in addition to his rushing value as well. He's not a Derrick Henry, a Dalvin Cook, a Christian McCaffrey in the sense that he's a top 10 pure runner, but he is potentially a top 10 fantasy back when you combine his, I don't even know, I think that saying he's an average rusher is kind of a discredit to the work he does in that area of the game, but he is an elite receiving weapon. So when you combine his slightly above average rushing ability with his elite receiving ability, you have a very quality fantasy profile, skill set, and potential for very quality production here on the field. So in year 2 with Justin Herbert, if he can stay healthy, he kind of had a freak accident last year too with a grade 2 or 3 hamstring strain. He should bounce back this season, be very good. The one area of the field that concerns me a little bit about his value is the goal line in the red zone, because he's not the biggest back on this roster, and we saw Joshua Kelly get a lot of opportunities down there last season. Hopefully he doesn't lose too much of that production this year. Again, something I knock Clyde Edwards-Helaire for is the fact that Pat Mahomes is not trying to check the ball down to his running backs in the flat, nor is Justin Herbert, I would argue. But still, the fact that we see Ekeler have 6.5 targets per game is encouraging for me, so I can try to look past that as much as possible. And collectively, I like what he gives me on a week-to-week basis. The next backup here is Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have him ranked as an RB1, as I do Austin Ekeler. Borderline RB1s at that. They're the lower end of the top 12 rankings, but these are guys still here in the second round. The value's too good to pass on. The production potential, the upside, it's all there. You've got the situation, an easy schedule for the Steelers this season. There's not too much more you can ask for. You've got yourself a big back who will be utilized in the goal line, who also has the skill set, the talent, the tools to be a receiver out of the backfield, a Le'Veon Bell-esque runner, and give you potentially that type of production. You're looking at a guy who could finish higher than what I currently have him ranked on my draft guide, and that is right around the RB11 spot right now. So give me Najee Harris all day in the second round. I love this draft pick across all fantasy league scoring formats. And then Antonio Gibson is the next guy up here, rounding out. Yep, he is my final name in the second round here. Gibson is, and kind of the trend here for the second round players has been maybe you're not getting elite rushing value, but all of these players have another element they bring to the table that can boost their ceiling and floor at the same time, and that piece has been the receiving game. Najee Harris gives that to me. Austin Ekeler gives that to me at an elite level, and so does Antonio Gibson, being that he was a former wide receiver in college. He's a dynamic player. Ron Rivera wants to use him more in the Washington football team offense this season, and he probably would have finished higher than RB13 in his rookie year had he not dealt with turf toe at the end of the season. So a lot of things that I like about Gibson. He scored a lot of touchdowns last year, showed me he can have that part of the game incorporated into his fantasy value. Again, the number was relatively inflated last season and high for a rookie player, so maybe I won't project him to improve in that category, but the rest of his overall usage and yardage output can, which will then bring him up the board. So Gibby in PPR formats could finish as an RB1. I wouldn't doubt it at all. He will have top 12 performances and finishes this season, but he'll probably, in the season end collective rankings, finish as right around that fringe running back one marker between, I would say, RB8 and RB14, somewhere spliced in between those picks. Then here, my lone third round must-own running back is J.K. Dobbins. He's starting to creep closer and closer to the second, but I think that for the most part, I don't love the running backs in this territory of the draft board. This is why you got to capitalize on these guys early. That's why you got to go out there, target those big names in the first round. That's why there was so many of them in the first, and I only left off two guys who are currently being drafted that spot because, again, I think that they're too good to be passed on for a wide receiver or tight end. Dobbins here makes the list over your Josh Jacobs, your Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's, because I think they have bigger risks and question marks associated with them. We know what we're getting out of J.K. Dobbins. It's not going to be workhorse volume. It's not going to be elite usage. It's going to be elite efficiency, and it's going to be the fact that Lamar Jackson is drawing the majority of the attention from him in this offense, and that's going to open up big running lanes, big holes, and give him the potential to hit home run balls, score touchdowns on the goal line. Gus Edwards will be involved. He'll snatch up some production and whatnot, but Dobbins will be the number one back in this offense, and he'll be the player that's leading things home. And the more and more the Ravens receiving core gets banged up here, apparently Rashad Bateman limped off the field. We don't know what that injury is quite yet as I'm recording this episode, but hopefully that's not serious. Hollywood Brown's already out for a chunk of time here. They might just become even more and more dependent on that run game, and that in turn could bolster the volume we see out of Dobbins here. In the fourth round, again, names I'm leaving off the board. Kareem Hunt is a fringe fourth round back. Travis Etienne's in that fringe category as well. But these are players that I think give you a really strong floor and are some of the few names at this spot on the draft board that have the potential to finish as high-end RB2s and really give you a strong top two running back core. If you were to fade this position until the fourth round to address it for the second time, these are the names I'd be looking at to do so. David Montgomery is my first name up here. For the Bears, he'll see elite volume. He's got three down back versatility and capability to be used that way. They do have Tariq Cohen. He'll be coming in and being used well as a receiver. But on first, second, third, and short, any situation outside of an obvious passing look, I expect Monty to be the back on the field. He can score touchdowns. He's got the size and the frame to do that, and he finished last year as one of the hottest fantasy finishers, right with Jonathan Taylor, and finished all the way up there. You see it at the RB4 spot because of just how good he was down the stretch. I think the only thing standing in his way is potentially his own team. If the Bears struggled more than I expect them to this season, they could be in passing down situations for the majority of the fourth quarter. That might keep him off the field if Tariq Cohen is the favored back in that sense of things. But I think the Bears will be a competitive team this year. I think they'll be in games, and Monty will be scoring touchdowns, getting his volume in the first 3 quarters. So, again, this is a high upside RB2 play for us this year. Chris Carson, a back who can do it all for the Seattle Seahawks. They do have Rashad Penny coming back this year off of his ACL injury finally. He did play a tiny bit at the end of last year, but he has missed a lot of time for injuries. He is an injury-prone player. We've seen that to this point in his career. Chris Carson is a guy, though, who can catch passes, be used on the goal line, used as a workhorse back. We've seen him be utilized in that fashion multiple seasons in his NFL career. This guy's quite the story. A former 6th-round pick turns into this caliber of a player. I think that all it takes for him this season is staying healthy throughout. He has been a little bit more of an injury-nagged player. He has seen some struggles with that, but not off the field. But when he's out there, he's fantastic. He's great in lineups. It's probably safe to handcuff him with Rashad Penny just in case something goes wrong. But at the end of the day, if he's out there, I mean, Russ Wilson's not afraid to throw this guy a fade ball. And that's pretty telling to a quarterback's trust in his player. And for a running back, not something you see every day. So just go out, watch some Chris Carson highlights. The guy's pretty impressive. And again, he does have the track record of being used as a workhorse type player. Pete Carroll says he wants to run the ball more this season, which we'll see if that actually happens. I foresee Russ cooking a lot of the time. But again, Chris Carson can catch the ball in the backfield. So even if he is passing it, there's still ways that Carson can get involved and go north of 20 touches on a per game basis very, very easily. Then last up here, I've got Darrell Henderson for the Los Angeles Rams. He's kind of a fringe late 4th rounder to early 5th rounder, but since his ADP currently has him resting in the 4th, I tossed him in today's video. Look, I was campaigning for fantasy owners of Cam Akers had they already had their drafts to make sure that they were owners of Darrell Henderson as well. And I hated to be wrong about that, I hated to be right about the fact that Cam Akers would deal with something. I didn't think it'd be an ACL or something that significant, but I did expect him to miss maybe 3 or 4 games this year just because of some of the ticky-tack things I saw him get dinged up with last year. But here we go. I mean, this is going to be the Darrell Henderson show this season. I do expect a minor committee-style offense from Sean McVay and the Rams this year. Xavier Jones is a name to know if you're a Darrell Henderson owner. Additionally, because just like Darrell Henderson, I was expecting to be a valuable handcuff asset to Cam Akers. Now, the former 3rd stringer and next man up behind Henderson is Xavier Jones, who has been promising, in the words of Sean McVay, or encouraging, I think it was, rather, that he actually said in his progression and what he's shown at camp this season so far. So he will be sprinkled in there on a week-to-week basis, but where the value comes at here is having him as an insurance policy. Nonetheless, the Rams have some pretty light opposing run defenses on their schedule this year. I think Henderson can take advantage of those. He's a player who, kind of like Jamal Williams that I talked about earlier on in today's episode, isn't really elite at any one particular trait, but doesn't really have a major flaw or hole in his game either. So Henderson, without Malcolm Brown in town either this year, should be able to come in, be utilized as a goal line asset, and not have TDs vultured away from him by a player of larger stature or better short down yardage situational ability. So Henderson, he sneaks into the list for me here. I think he's a player that is definitely worth grabbing, and I would hold off and draft your next wide receiver or tight end option in the 5th, because that's where I love the prospective options of your TJ Hawkinsons, your Mark Andrews, getting them in the 5th, or your Tyler Lockett's, Brandon Ayuk's, Odell Beckham Jr.'s in the 5th as well. So draft that next running back in the 4th round here with one of those 3 names I just went through, and then wait for those other spots until the next round. All right, there you go. So those are my must-own running backs in rounds 1 through 4 for the upcoming fantasy season. Again, the last name in each round, you can really argue it either way, but I feel pretty strongly about all these players, and I absolutely would target these guys on draft day as opposed to another position, because I think their value just outweighs what another player can give you at this draft spot. So make sure you're taking advantage of the running back position in the early rounds of your drafts. It's the most important spot on the board and the most scarce position in these one quarterback leagues. So we got to hit it early and often. Make sure we're taking advantage of the players available to us and all the things after that will fall into place. So thank you so much for watching today's video. Make sure to leave a like before you head out if you haven't already. And if you're new around here, click that subscribe button, turn the bell on, and you'll never be late for an episode. So with that being said, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.